So, good evening. Welcome to the third lecture in our IBC Bank and Commerce Bank Keynote Speaker Series for 2025 and 2026. My name is George Clark. I'm the Director of the Center for the Study of Western Hemispheric Trade in Texas A&M International University's A.R. Sanchez School of Business. Our center, together with IBC Bank and Commerce Bank, brings speakers to talk about topics in the areas of international trade, economics, finance, demography, immigration, and border issues. So before introducing today's speaker, I'd like to thank our sponsors for supporting this event, IBC and Commerce Bank. With their support, we've been able to bring many thought-provoking speakers over the years to TAMIU and Laredo. And now for a little bit of housekeeping for the students. At the end of Dr. Gerber's presentation, there will be a question and answer session. We'll take questions from the audience in attendance here today. For those in attendance, please raise your hand and one of the student workers will bring you a microphone. Please wait till you get the microphone because it's very difficult for the online participants or for people sitting behind you to hear you unless you've got the microphone in your hand. So if you can just wait a few seconds until you get the microphone, that would be great. For those in attendance, you can also submit your questions online via Slido using the QR code on the front of your program. If you're attending virtually, you can submit your questions using the Q&A feature in Teams, and we will try to address as many questions as our allotted time allows. For students attending in person and on behalf of one of your classes, you should have had your student ID scanned at the door. In addition, there's a QR code inside the program which will take you to an online form where you will submit your class information. Finally, you will scan your ID when departing once the lecture's ended. For students attending online, your class information should have been submitted during the registration process. So today's speaker is Dr. James Gerber. Dr. Gerber is currently a senior fellow in the Center for U.S.-Mexican Studies at the University of California, San Diego, and professor of economics at San Diego State University. He recently wrote an excellent book on border communities in the United States and Mexico entitled Border Economies, Cities Bridging the U.S.-Mexico Divide. In addition, he's written 2 other academic books and the widely used undergraduate textbook, International Economics. His research focuses on the macroeconomic history of Mexico, the U.S.-Mexico border region, and U.S.-Mexico relations. His recent articles include articles on human development on the U.S.-Mexico border, the role of free trade in the promotion of economic change in Mexico, and the impact on Mexico of the 1907 U.S. financial crisis. So let's welcome Dr. Gerber to TAMIU and to Laredo.
Thank you, George. Thank you, George. Everybody hear me okay? It's a pleasure to be here. I am very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you and to visit with TAMIU University in Laredo. I want to thank Commerce Bank and IBC Bank for this opportunity and for making this type of event happen. I think it's really a great community contribution, and I'm grateful for it. The title of the talk is Swimming Against the Current, because I think the border region has constantly, throughout its history, been swimming against currents successfully, right? This is not, the current has not held us back, I would say, but it's something that we've been able to navigate time and time again. There are a lot of currents running against us, and I'll talk about some of those. I also want to talk a little bit about the book that Dr. Clark mentioned that I published 2 years ago. It's called the Border Economies book, and try to sketch out a little bit why I think border communities are different from communities in the interior. It's not just a matter of demographics or income levels, but there's a different characteristic that's quite important. Right? And then talk a little bit at the end about some of the challenges that I think are facing particularly northern Mexico, since that is so important for those of us living on the U.S. side, and address the nearshoring issue and whatnot. So Let me start with what I think are, the first current, which we're all aware of, and this is the image of the border. I live on the border also. It's a very different community, San Diego, than Laredo, but it is a border community. And we all face, I think, those of us living on the border, the perception about the border that's part of our national narrative in the United States, which really doesn't reflect the reality of border life and border living. And I think this is a current that we have to constantly sort of swim against. It's a bit hard to do, to change that narrative without sounding as if you're an apologist, perhaps, for policies you disagree with. But it is something that I think, really have to think about. How do we tell our story? How do we bring a greater perspective of realism to what is really that we're about more than just terrorists and violence, et cetera. That's not really the border, but this is a really strong current in the U.S., as I'm sure you're all aware of, and even to some extent in Mexico, it's also a current that I know. I'm not sure what people in Mexico City say about Nuevo Laredo, but in Mexico City they say Tijuana. That's not really Mexico. That's just agringado, 100%, and it's, well, okay, but it's Mexico, it's one of many. All right, so I thought I should put up a map because I know where the border is. When I talk to people, sometimes they're not quite sure where the border is, but I know you all know that. I don't mean to insult your knowledge base, but what I wanted to point out here is that one of the unique characteristics of this border, which we take for granted, but if we look worldwide, it is really a distinguishing feature, is the fact that the border people, borderlanders, those of us that live in the border region on either side, we are concentrated in about 14 pairs of twin cities. Right? This system of twin cities, you don't really see that elsewhere in the world. You may see a pair of cities or maybe even two pairs of cities on another border, but not this, not 2,000 miles of twin cities. It also emphasizes, what I want to do with this map is I want to emphasize the following. We're aware, I think we have mental images of the border as this vast space of deserts and mountains, which it is. That is part of the border. But the population on the border is urban. It lives in urban cities. It lives in, as I said, 14 pairs of what economic geographers would call metropolitan statistical areas. These are urban conurbations, and they're twinned, right? There's a Mexican counterpart to every U.S. city. This is one of the things that shapes the border and border communities in a unique direction from what we see elsewhere in the United States or in Mexico, right? And it creates a border economy. When I first started teaching, is in another millennium, I had colleagues that talked about the border economy. And I thought, I was just out of graduate school. I didn't study Mexico in graduate school. Can you hear me? It sounded like it went off. I didn't study Mexico. I didn't study the border. I studied international economics. And I just had this question mark. What is a border economy? I know what a border is, and I know what an economy is. But what is a border economy? What is that? Right? It took me a while to try to figure that out. But what creates the border economy is this system of twin cities. It creates a unique economic environment along the U.S.-Mexico border, right? And it's a result of people crossing the border to do all the things that people do when they move from the city they live in to an adjacent city, right? We could be talking about New Jersey, New York, right? But we're not. We're talking about Mexico, U.S. And people are crossing the border to visit family and friends, to go to the doctor, to take their pet to the veterinarian, to go to school, to go to work, to visit, just hang out, to divertirse, to enjoy themselves, to eat, to have, a good time. All the reasons that you might cross the border. But this creates a flow, not just of people, but it creates a flow of goods and services and a flow of capital. And there's the border economy. That's where the border economy lies. Okay, so how many people cross the border? This is another unique. I could, if I want to continue this metaphor of swimming against the current, that crossing the border is the border is another current in terms of crossing. I mean, it's sometimes, I know, particularly if you're going from south to north, it can be hard to get across. In San Diego now, it's also become in the afternoon as people return home to work, it can take you an hour or more to get into Tijuana from San Diego. Because of the large flow of people and the fact that they're now exercising greater vigilance on who's exiting the U.S. So many people crossing. It's another unique characteristic of the border region, right? Is the amount of people crossing. 166 million people crossed from south to north in 2025, right? Now, that's not unique individuals. I'm not saying there were 166 million separate individuals. What I'm saying is that if I live in Nuevo Laredo and I work in Laredo and I cross 5 times a week to go to work, that's That's 5 crossings, right? So this 166 million, how many unique individuals is that? I don't know. I'd have to do the math. It'd take me a little while to figure that out. And it would be an uncertain number because we don't really know. We're not really certain about that. But that's a lot of crossings, right? That's a lot of crossings. San Diego, Tijuana, for example, over 44 million in 2025. And I like to compare that to Canada, US. So if we add up all the crossings across the entire length of the Canadian border into the US, it's 3/4 as large as San Diego, Tijuana, right? It's 33 million versus 44 million in 2025, right? In the current political environment, the crossings from Canada have dropped off fairly significantly. It's down, 2025 is down about 24% from the year before. Crossings from Mexico are down 8%, also down, right? We're still below the peaks that we hit in the early 2000s, right? We have to go back a ways to get, but this is still a massive amount of crossing. And as you can see, Laredo is what, 1, 2, 3, the 4th most important crossing area, over 12 million, almost 13 million crossings in 2025. And this is individuals, right? So if we, as you all know, if we take commerce, it's a different, Laredo's in its own league in that respect. If we're talking about movement of goods. Okay, so what creates the border economy? It's this proximity of cities next to each other with these enormous flows back and forth of people, which generates flows of goods and services and of capital. Okay, and I'm gonna talk about those factors because over time, that creates the communities that we see on the border. The communities on both sides are shaped in very definite ways by these flows of people, goods, and capital. This is the book I wrote, so this is I just wanted to say that this analysis that I'm going to present to you right now, it comes out, a lot of it is present in this book, right? And the only point I want to make with this slide is that border communities are profoundly interdependent. I mean, they really are interdependent on each other, unlike communities in the interior. This is what makes us different from communities in the interior. I wrote another book with a colleague almost 20 years ago, not quite, about the U.S.-Mexico border. It's called 50 Years of Change on the U.S.-Mexico border. And when I was presenting that book, I was asked by a person in the audience, so what makes border cities different? What really makes them different? And I didn't really have a good answer for that. I did the professor thing where I sort of stumbled around and said some things and hoped the conversation would move on. But it provoked in me a question in my own mind, why are they different, right? How are they different? How are they different? This is how they're different. This book is an answer to that question in part. They're different because cities on the border, cities on the U.S. side of the border, are shaped by events and policies and things that occur in a foreign country, i.e. Mexico. And cities on the Mexican side of the border experience a similar relationship in that they're shaped by events and occurrences and policies that originate on the U.S. side of the border. That makes us different. This does not happen in Iowa or in the state of Hidalgo, Mexico, right? It doesn't happen like that there, right? It makes us different. But to see this, and for me to convince you, I have to give you some examples, right? And in order to see those examples, we have to think about it in a historical time. Right? That is, we have to see the change over time, because you can't really see it if you look at this year's data. You're not going to see this, right? But this is where a little bit of historical perspective can really help to shape our opinion and give us a more complete understanding of the things that we're interested in. Okay, so here's like 5 examples that are in the book in more detail. 4 of these have chapters in the book. Right? Let me just talk a little bit about tourism. Now, tourism is not as big a deal on the outside of El Paso, Juarez. Tourism didn't really develop historically in the way that it did on the western end of the border. Right? And that's in part because that's the eastern side, the eastern part of the border, the lower Rio Grande Valley in particular, is older. It was settled a long time before the Mexican-American War, right? And that the communities that lived there were the same people, right? They're the same people. I mean, Nuevo Laredo, basically historically the same people, right? San Diego, Tijuana, or Mexicali, Calexico, or Ambos Nogales, to some extent. And I also would say that El Paso, Juarez, a little bit different case. That was not true in the same way. And for example, in the year 1900, Tijuana today is about 2 million people. In 1900, it had 242. There was not a city there. Mexicali didn't exist. Right? It just didn't exist as a place. Right? The western part of the border developed much later. And in part, it's related to the water issue. It's partly related to that. But one of the things that happened that was quite curious was, as you all know, you've all heard of Prohibition, which was in 1918, we passed a constitutional amendment in the U.S. that outlawed alcohol consumption. It wasn't really that much enforced everywhere because the federal government left it up to the states and the localities to enforce it. But even before that, some states had passed bans on consumption of alcohol, production and consumption of alcohol. Arizona, for example, passed it way before the federal government. This was a movement. It was a movement in not just the United States, but in many other places, a movement, new public health and public safety movement that was trying to bring systems of sanitation and healthier living to the public. So alcohol prohibitions was part of that. You know, there were campaigns against gambling that were part of it. There were campaigns against boxing that were part of it. Campaigns against horse racing. Campaigns against prostitution. Right? All of the vices that the campaigners thought were unhealthy for society and for individuals. Right? These campaigns go back to the 1800s. Right? By 1910, 1912, they're starting to have a real impact. U.S. and Mexican investors see an opportunity. Look, we can, just across the border, we can build casinos. We can put in saloons and bars. We can put in racetracks, right? And we can create, profits. And we can market it to the Americans as, visit old, exotic old Mexico, right? This is Tijuana, which had 242 people in 1900. So it's really not, it's like Disneyland. It's all an imaginary, right? It's just created on a whole cloth, but it's quite successful. In the case of El Paso and Juarez, they collaborated closely, and when El Paso got a southern route on the Transcontinental Railroad, they worked with Juarez and they said, look, let's market our towns together so that we can host big conventions, right? So El Paso becomes a convention stop. So you're going from east to west, maybe you're going to LA or someplace along the southern route, right? Stop in El Paso, and you can enjoy a foreign country, and we can have a convention destination there, et cetera, right? So you get tourism that takes off. It becomes quite important. Now, Tijuana is not a tourism town today. If you go there and you talk to people in hospitality management, and you say, is Tijuana a tourism? Yeah, not really. It's not. I mean, people do go to visit there because of the gastronomy and because of wine and whatnot, but it's not a big tourism place. Mexicali, a little bit, not so much, really. But they were, right? They were. This was part of the historical development of the region that shaped those communities, that brought outsiders into those communities, brought investment into those communities, right? What caused it? Policy in the U.S., right? It was a result of our policies, right? Similarly with retail, this is one that's undergoing change right now. But, you all are perhaps familiar with Mexican economic policies in the middle of the 20th century, under the label of import substitution industrialization. So this was the idea that Mexico could develop economically by focusing on the production of goods that substituted for imports. So we call that import substitution industrialization, or ISI for short. This was Mexican policy, not just in Mexico, but in most developing countries followed this policy officially after World War II. Right? In Mexico's case, it was showing up, but before that, because of the effects on Mexico of World War II, and then before that, the Great Depression, and then before that, World War I. But officially after World War II, this becomes a policy. One of the ways you do that, one of the ways you support the growth and development of these new industries is that you put prohibitions on imports of competing goods, right? So what does this mean? It means that if you live in Mexico City, your ability to buy certain items, certain consumer goods that are readily available in the United States is really constrained. You don't really have good access to those things. If you live in the border region, you can just simply slip across the border and you have greater variety of goods, right? Greater quality, better quality in many cases of goods. So what happens? So on the U.S. side, merchants see an opportunity to service not only their own communities, but the community across the border. So you get small towns like Calexico as a prime example, which is across from Mexicali, which is a big city. And Calexico has an enormous retail sector because of that. Throughout most of the 20th century, really this only begins to change with the signing of the free trade agreement between the U.S. and Mexico, but even more importantly, with the change in Mexican policies beginning in the 1980s, it begins to open up the market. Right? It begins to change the market. So the quality and the variety of goods and services or goods available in Mexican stores begins to rival what's available in U.S. stores. But meanwhile, we build out on our side, we build out a large retail sector, which may seem, oh, that's interesting, but is it really that important? Yeah, it is, because here's what happens. Mexico has a financial crisis in the 70s. It has another really severe one in the 80s. It has another one in 94, 95. right? In those crises, the peso falls in value dramatically overnight. People stop crossing the border to shop. American cities on the border go into depression, right? It has a big impact, not just on the retail merchants, but also on local governance, because government depends upon sales taxes, right? People aren't buying, there's no sales tax, right? We saw this is diminished in importance because of the growth of the retail sector on the Mexican side and because of e-commerce, but it's still important. It's still important. To what extent, I don't know. I wrote about this in the 90s, but how has it changed since then? I'm not quite sure, but I know it's less important. We know, however, that it's not disappeared as an effect, because when the border was closed as a result of COVID, we saw significant effects on some border cities, particularly in Texas. Right? The lower Rio Grande Valley had definite effects from this. So it's still a factor, but this is, again, living on, what shaped this? This was shaped by policies in Mexico that shaped the development, the direction of development of cities on the U.S. side of the border. Okay, manufacturing I'm going to talk about in a more detail, but so let me just skip that for now. Water is, how am I doing on time? Water is really complicated. I'm going to skip talking about that, but it is an interesting story. The short story is this, is that both the U.S. and Mexico were competing to expand our agricultural frontiers. Mexico into the northwest, which was sparsely populated. So this is under Calles and Cardenas and others, but even before that, even during the end of the Porfiriato, they attempting to colonize the north, partly to prevent further American land grabs. Right? Mexico wanted to settle people in the north. Right? So, but if you're going to settle people in the north, you have to have a way for them to make a living. So, okay, agriculture. But if you're going to have agriculture, you need water, because this is a dry, arid region, so it needs irrigation, right? At the same time, the U.S. creates the Bureau of Reclamation, and it's building out an irrigation infrastructure into the southwest of the United States. So we're both competing madly for the Rio Grande or Rio Bravo water and the Colorado River water, right? And so this is really being shaping the communities because of the way that agriculture develops. For example, cotton becomes super important in northwestern Mexico, and Mexicali becomes one of the world's largest exporters of cotton. It becomes important to the Mexican balance of payments in the 1950s, for example, until the cotton industry declines for various reasons. Water is a really interesting story, and it's still playing out, right? Because we're still fighting over, the water rights, not water rights, but our obligations to deliver water to the Rio Grande, right? This is still a contentious issue between the U.S. and Mexico. Okay, I wanted to mention medical services, because I think this is fairly new, although it's been building for a couple of decades at least. But we're really seeing in some parts of the border a big development on the Mexican side, which is completely in response to the lack of accessibility and the lack of affordability on the U.S. side. In other words, Mexican entrepreneurs in the medical field have seen that there are great opportunities if they can provide medical services to Americans, right? So this picture I have, this is New City Tower in Tijuana. It's about, it's about 2 blocks from the border, 3 blocks from the border. You can walk there if you so choose. It's a medical services, everything you need. You could get your hip replaced. You can stay in the spa there after the replacement, or if you just want to go see a doctor and get checked out, you can have that done. There are several other examples of this in Tijuana alone. It's happening in other parts of the border, but I haven't really studied this to give you a good sort of geography of it. I'm not sure exactly which cities. We know for many years, however, that dentists and just medical doctors' offices and increasingly veterinarians on the Mexican side are catering to an American audience as part of their services. You know, I think this is a real growth area. I think it's a huge growth area. I can buy a policy similar to what I would get in the U.S. at a health maintenance organization in San Diego, say. I can buy that same policy for accessing services in Tijuana. It would cost me about 1/3 of the price of what it is in San Diego. I've toured these facilities. I'm not a doctor. I'm not qualified to evaluate them. They look good to me. You know, they look very, I mean, they've got the latest equipment. They've got everything you need. And this is Mexico's comparative advantage. Mexico is a caring economy, or a caring society, I should say, right? That you can see a doctor and you can spend time talking to that person. You know, the man or woman is not going to kick you out after 15 or 20 minutes, as happens on the U.S. side, at least where I get my health care, right? So part of that also is that what we're seeing, I haven't toured these, but they're building senior assisted living centers that cater to basically my generation. You know, baby boomers who are retired and then are becoming really aged to the point where they need additional care, right? This is a growth field. It's a growth field in the border economies along Mexico, unevenly so. From what I've been told, it's maybe not happening in Nuevo Laredo. I'm not sure about that. It's not happening everywhere. But it's a case, what's going on here in terms of my overall hypothesis? This is a case where American policies have made health care in the U.S. Unavailable to large segments of the population. And on the other side of the border in Mexico, people see an opportunity. And they're investing in that service in ways that is beginning to shape those communities, right? This will play out over generations. I mean, this is not going to be done in the next 3 years. This is a generational change. When my daughter asked me the other day what my plans were for when I needed care, and I'm like, what? I said, well, I'm going to Tijuana. And she didn't like that answer. Yeah. Okay. So is the cross-border integrated? This is the for economists out there. This is the paradox in some way. Are we integrated? Economists say no, right? Or let me put it this way: economic analysis says we're not integrated. So if you take the definition of economic integration that economists use, which I think needs some work. I think the definition is not a good one. The definition is that integration implies either the absence of differences, so things like income and prices are not different, or a diminishment over time in the size of the differences. So we're either the same in terms of our incomes and our prices, or we're closing the gap. We're becoming more alike. Right? That's integration. You don't see that in the border cities. You really don't see it. You know, so I apologize for all the numbers, and I just gave you a partial set. So I calculated the estimates of GDP per person. So this is a total amount of output in that metropolitan area divided by the population. So GDP per person, right? which INEGI, the Mexican Statistical Agency, doesn't provide. So these are my calculations. And then I can get from the U.S. Department of Commerce GDP per person on the U.S. side, in the metropolitan area on the U.S. side. So these numbers are the differences between those two. So it's a U.S. value minus the Mexican value. And you can see that it's growing over time, right? It's really growing over time. It's not diminishing. We're not closing the gap in income over time, right? And yet we're highly interdependent and interactive. What drives integration, according to economic theory, is interdependency and interaction, right? We are some of the most highly interdependent, different cities in different nation states, perhaps in the world, but we're not becoming integrated. So I think, I'm an economist, so, this is my discipline, I have to talk in their terms, but I think we need to revisit how we define integration. And so that's kind of what I'm working on. There's a couple of things here I want to point out. If you look at the two bottom lines and the last column, the two bottom lines. So one is 14 pairs of twin cities. Just take the average of the differences. Just take the average of the differences, and it's $17,305. Okay. The national differences, U.S. and Mexico, 44,650, right? So we're about, what is that? We're about 40% as large as the national differences. We're more alike than at the national level, right? But we're not closing that gap right now. That's a complicated issue. I don't know exactly why that is, but I think it's really worth digging into some more, which is one of the things I'm trying to do. We're not closing the gap. The other thing, which is an oddity here, and I still haven't decided if I believe this or not, but this is what the numbers say. I mean, you can, in the Q&A, you can tell me why you either think it's right or you think it's wrong. But if you look at Hidalgo, Texas, which is the county, which is the metropolitan area that includes McAllen, Edinburgh, and Mission. It's across from Reynosa. By my calculations, Reynosa has a higher GDP per person than the U.S. side, right? Is that conceivable? I mean, one thing to remember is this: GDP. We use it as a shorthand measurement of income, but it's not income. It's not what you get in your pocket. It's not what you take home, right? To get from GDP to income, there's a lot of things that are subtracted. So you could have car plants in Reynosa that produce a huge amount of value, but that value, and so that's counted in the output, but the value doesn't go to people living in Reynosa. It goes to owners of the car plant in Mexico or the United States or Germany or wherever they might be, right? So anyway, is it conceivable that the value of the output that's produced in Reynosa is higher than it is in McAllen, Edinburgh, Mission? Yeah, to me it's conceivable. I'm not going to wager large amounts of money on it. But it seems like it's very possible because Reynosa is very industrial. It has a large industrial sector from the maquila industry. Okay, so not integrated, very interactive, not integrated. Let me talk a little bit more about manufacturing. This is another current that I think the border swims against. So I mentioned already that Mexican policies throughout the middle of the 20th century were very inward focused, looking towards the development of the Mexican economy, not thinking so much about exports. Although they did try to develop some export strength, but they were not successful at that. They followed import substitution industrialization, as I've already mentioned, and there was another program called PRONAF, Programa Nacional Fronterizo, which was an attempt to build up the border economy, which Mexican presidents felt was becoming too attached to the U.S. So try to build it up so it was more focused into Mexico. It basically accomplished very little, almost nothing. This guy, Octaviano Campos Salas, was an economist. He was a minister of commerce and had some other positions in the Mexican government. He toured East Asia. He saw what are called export processing zones. So these were zones where you could import inputs and pay no tariffs as long as they were processed into an export. All right, these are called export processing zones. There's a big literature about these in international economics. And he said, yeah, we could do that. We could do that. So he comes back, he proposes that. This is the beginning of the maquiladora industry. It's swimming against the current in the sense that it's focused outward. This is a Mexican program that's focused on exports at a time when the national economic development policy was still focused on building up the domestic economy. So as a consequence, in my view, I think for most of its history, the Maquila program was not completely embraced by the Mexican government. They saw it as sort of a foreign beachhead that was gaining a place in the Mexican economy, right? It was necessary because it earned foreign exchange and it provided a lot of jobs, right? Its big advantage was it provided a lot of jobs. Although initially, at least, most of the jobs, or a large percentage of the jobs, went to women. And that was not expected at the time. That was a sort of a development that was a bit unexpected. Okay, that's, women still play a major role in it, but less than initially. Okay, so this was, again, swimming against the current. This is also, this has led us to the present where we think, well, we have the IMEX program now. It's not called the Maquila program. It's legally a little bit different regimen, but it's still a export-oriented manufacturing. And the thought has been in recent decades that Mexico is going to become a high-income, advanced industrial economy through the development of manufactured goods exports. Right? So this is a path followed by Hong Kong, Korea, Taiwan, and before them, Japan, and before Japan, the United States, and Western Europe, et cetera. Let's make manufactured goods. That's where we're going to focus our energy, and we're going to export them as a source of revenue. This was a development strategy in Mexico from the 1980s forward. After the abandonment of ISI policies, the thought was, well, this is where we're going. We're going to be the next Korea, if you will. Okay. And the northern border states are manufacturing powerhouses. They really became, the last time I looked at the statistics, about 58% of Mexico's manufactured goods exports originate in the 6 border states. I mean, the 6 northern border states are manufacturing powerhouses, and they help change the profile of Mexico. Mexico exports more manufactured goods than the rest of Latin America combined. And a lot of that is driven by the 6 northern border states. Okay, so this is meant to show you the following. It's the share of the labor force in manufacturing, right, as an indicator of the relative importance of manufacturing. Now, when countries like the United States and Germany and other Western European countries, or Korea or Japan, were at the peak of their manufacturing development, we had about 30% of our labor force in manufacturing. And that's a pretty common number. Some countries got up to 35 or even a little bit higher. Some weren't quite at 30, but around 30% is where they got. And you can see that the northern border states are at 30 or above, except Sonora, which has a very large ag sector, right? And doesn't have the same connection to urban areas on the U.S. side. It has some, but not to the same extent. But here's the thing: it's all going down. It's all going down. The share of the labor force in manufacturing is declining. The data here comes from the Mexican economic census, right? And in particular, at the national level, the share of the labor force in manufacturing peaked at about 25%. So close to what the U.S. got to, but not quite there yet. And that was, early 2000s, and then it started declining. It's around 20% now. It's actually a little bit less than that, I would argue. There's some hidden biases in these statistics that I think make them look larger than they actually are. But this is what the economic census says, right? The question is this: if manufacturing is declining, not in absolute terms, not in terms of the value of what's produced, and not in terms yet of the number of workers in manufacturing. This is the share, the percentage of the labor force in manufacturing. It says the manufacturing sector is becoming a smaller part of the economy. Okay? Is it still a viable path towards becoming a high-income, advanced industrial economy? That's the question. The answer is, I don't know. I don't know. Well, we're going to have to play this out and see how it goes, but I want to talk about it a little bit. Manufacturing is really desirable historically. Historically, the thought has been that if you want to be high income, you have to have a strong manufacturing sector. That's how you get there, right? And there's some good reasons for it. It's the 4 are listed there. Economies of scale. Manufacturing has economies of scale. You can make, if what you're doing is good, you can like double, triple, quadruple the size of your plant. You can get big, within some limits. But I mean, it's got a lot of scale that you don't see in services, for example. It's hard to scale up a barber shop, right? Whereas if you're making, transmissions, you can scale that up. Innovation, because manufacturing's tied to capital goods, machinery, it's easier to innovate, right? So a lot of services can't be innovated, right? They just simply cannot really be innovated. You can change their form. Give you an example, a Mozart sonata. How are you going to innovate that? You can play it differently, but it's still going to take you the same amount of time. You're still going to have at the end a Mozart sonata. You're not going to have 3 Mozart sonatas. You can change the form in which it's appreciated by putting it, streaming it or putting it on a CD. But the live music, you can't really, quote unquote, innovate it in the same way that you can innovate machinery. So innovation's a big deal. Linkages. Manufacturing's linked to a lot of things. If you make cars or car parts, there's so many other industries that are linked to that are affected by it, right? So that's a really desirable characteristic. And jobs. You get a lot of jobs out of manufacturing, right? So this is why manufacturing historically, and still today in most places, is considered the path towards becoming high-income industrial economy, a developed economy. This is why. But if manufacturing is losing its share of economic activity, is this still a viable option? Right? That's the question. Okay. this is happening, what the table I showed you with the decline in the share of manufacturing in Mexico, this is happening around the world, right? It's happening everywhere. It's already happened in a really big way in high-income countries, right? So the United States, as I said, not counting World War II, which is an outlying set of years, but after the war, when the economy settled down, we had 32% of our labor force in manufacturing. Today, it's under 8%, right? It's under 8%. But we produce far more goods and services than we did when we had 32%, right? So we're producing more things, far more, with a lot fewer workers, right? So what's going on? Well, automation. Right? The technological revolution that began in the 1970s, really, but showed up in a big way in the 1990s with computers and information technologies and digitalization and all this. That technological revolution is changing manufacturing dramatically, right? And it's making it less necessary to have as many workers involved in manufacturing production. That's a technological force that, I don't know how, I don't want to stop it. I don't know how you would if you wanted to stop it. I don't know how you would, right? But those types of technological changes create a lot of disruption, right, as you know. The other thing is globalization, right, is that we don't try to make everything for ourselves to the same extent that we used to before. We outsource things. Right? And the third thing is China. China is just this powerhouse of manufacturing, right? And China's not going away. So perhaps, as I say, as you can see, so it's difficult to see, but that line, the Chinese line is the black line with the small dots. And it kind of goes up around 2002, 2003 when China enters the WTO, but it's flat after that, right? So as China becomes the world's largest manufacturing economy by far, its share of the labor force in manufacturing is not going up, right? It's not adding, manufacturing employment as a share of its economy. Okay, the one line on there that is going up consistently, that's Vietnam, right? Or as my students like to tell me, it's actually called China's China, right? That's where they're offshoring to. Okay, so this is a new current to swim against. Is this deindustrialization? How important is this? I don't know. I don't really know. How far is this going to go? The automation is not going to reverse, right? I think it's going to continue. I think that's pretty certain. But what does that mean for the ability of economies to become high-income economies based upon manufacturing activities? That's the big question mark. And I don't think we really know. But this is what we see in Mexico. This is, and it's what we're observing in manufacturing is a version of what we've seen in agriculture. In the U.S., there's less than 2% of the labor force in agriculture, making, an enormous amount of output. But it's doing it with, combines and other agricultural machinery, which is super expensive, but it substitutes for lots of people and increases output and efficiency enormously, right? So the dotted line is that's growing on this graph. This is services. So if agriculture is going down, because that's the way it goes in every country that we're aware of, I don't know, North Korea, I'm not sure about, but it's going down everywhere. And if manufacturing is stalled out and starting to decline, what's left? Services, right? Services is what we need to. So the question is, as I have up here, can countries grow rich based on services? This is another question I don't know the answer to, right? But this is where employment is going to increasingly be concentrated. So we need to figure this out. We've got to figure out how to do this because more and more of us are going to be working in service industries. Now, that may sound a little bit scary. I don't know if it does or not. But, Laredo is a perfect example. Laredo is like service intensive because of the importance of transportation and logistics in Laredo, right? And these are not low-paying jobs. Right? We think of services as being low paying. Many of them are low paying, but many of them are not. Right? So this is what we've got to figure out. Okay, so this is a picture for the U.S. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I just wanted to convince you, what's happening in the U.S., particularly with the current policies that we have in place. The top graph is our output. I'd like to, before I show this, I always used to ask my students, in what year did U.S. manufacturing output reach its greatest value? And, I get answers like 1960s, 1970s. The answer is always last year, right? Unless it was a recession. If it was a recession, it wasn't last year. That's the big dip on the top graph, or the two big dips are recession years. The gray lines are recessions in this, right? So output's going up, but employment was, after that hump right in the beginning of the graph, which is World War II, employment settles around 30%, just a little bit above that for a number of years into the 60s, and then it starts declining. It's down around, it's below 8% now, and it's still declining, right? Even with the tariffs, it's declining. Okay, so the question is, how much value do you give up if you switch from manufacturing to services? I mean, how much more productive is manufacturing than services, right? So this is, services are, if you take services as a whole, this is for Mexico. I have a breakdown of the states as well. But if you take services as a whole, the value added of services on average is about 57% of what you get in manufacturing. Right? But now there's services and there are services, right? So they're all over the map. Some of them are way below 50% as productive. Some are actually above the level of the average for manufacturing. But the bottom rows are what I find interesting because what it shows is that this is the value of output. It's measured in millions of pesos per worker, right? And it's standardized for changes in prices. So these are in real terms. The growth rate of productivity in services is way above what it is in manufacturing. Right? That overall manufacturing productivity is not increasing hardly at all. But in services it is. Now, these are averages, so there's a lot of variation around this. I want to be clear about that, right? But services are closing the gap with manufacturing at a fairly rapid pace, and they have two other advantages, and that is their water productivity and their energy productivity. So what I'm showing you here is a value added, measured in millions of pesos per unit of water input or per unit of energy input. Right? So how much value can you generate with 1 unit of energy or 1 unit of water? And how does that differ in services compared to manufacturing? Right? And what we see is this. We see that, and these are two variables, water and energy, water in particular, that are really important in the northern region of Mexico and in the southwest of the United States, that services are far more productive in that sense. So from a conservation or environmental standpoint, they are superior than to manufacturing. Okay, so what kind of services are there? I was in Japan, and I thought I had to take a photo of this, and then I had to put it in the presentation. Japan doesn't really have any borders, but they have a border tourism program. at the University of Hokkaido, which is in Sapporo, on the northern island, the far northern island. And they do try to sell border tourism, in a place where they don't really have borders in the way that we think of it. I mean, they have international boundaries, but they don't have borders. But these are the types of services on the border that I think you find to different extent in different border communities that are the things that we should be looking at as alternatives to manufacturing if we feel that manufacturing is not going to provide us with the incomes that we want. And particularly on the U.S. side, right? Because the U.S. side is not a manufacturing intensive. Nowhere along the U.S.-Mexico border is manufacturing really important on the U.S. side. But this is, in particular what I'm telling, people on the U.S. side, but also people on the Mexican side in particular. Where are you going to go if manufacturing doesn't work? These are the places you should be looking. These are places where Mexico actually can perform at a quite high level, right? And we also, we need to think about this from my perspective, because this is where we're going to be, and this is where we want people to have jobs that pay them a wage that enables them to earn a good living, right? It has another added benefit, which I talk about in a paper I wrote, but I don't talk about it here, which is that, services create more jobs for women as well. So as women enter the labor force, this becomes also an important aspect of it. Okay, so can we develop high-income economies based on services? The answer is nobody knows. These photos, just to tell you where they are, this is a culinary art school in Tijuana. If you get a chance, it's actually called that. It doesn't have a name in Spanish. But all the instructions in Spanish, the students are Mexican, et cetera. If you get a chance if you come to Tijuana, go visit it. They have the art school, and then they have La Brecha right next to it, which is where some of their students have set up restaurants and chocolate shops and bakeries. And this one is a little coffee shop, which is in a parking garage underground where they put in a VW microbus, and they've created a coffee shop around it with baked goods that they produce. It's really a trip. This is in Baja. This has become an important part of the services delivery, which is the culinary tourism. Right, it has become quite important. That's one example. There are many examples: medical tourism, et cetera. So how do we get there? I don't know. This is what we need to find out. This is what I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about. So thank you so much for listening to me.
So what we'll do now is we'll move into the Q&A session. So we'll take questions from the audience and questions from the online audience too. So for the online audience, the Q&A should be open for you. And if you're in the audience here and you have a question, please just raise your hand and we'll have one of the students bring a microphone to you. Please wait till you get the microphone.
I guess more than a question, a comment. I believe that the border communities have been sidelined in terms of national development of the two countries, and really what at the end makes sense in terms of the relationship between service, manufacturing, or agriculture is the national policy that will be balanced and well orchestrated and be in the service of national development, not at least like in many developing countries in the benefit of the elites. So there is this uneven development within countries in terms of geography, but also within geographies. For instance, This manufacturing in Mexico has been part of multinational corporations. Those are the ones maximizing their profits in a global level, but the national interests of Mexico are secondary. So there is some mismatch between the different actors playing at different levels. And because of this mismatch, in this case, the border communities are just fending by themselves.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for the comment. I think probably your perspective is shared by many people, particularly, I would argue, maybe not only, but in Mexico. Here's what I feel. You know, I'm a citizen of San Diego. I can't wait for Washington to get its policies together. We need to do what we need to do in our region to make our region more prosperous. And if we do that, our nation becomes more prosperous. You know, I think we can't wait. We need, you know, here we are at TAMIU. This is a great institution on the border, right? You're doing it. You're training the next generation of high productive, high skilled workers in the border region. You know, and if you wait for the national government, whether it's in Mexico or the US, to figure out the right set of policies, you know, I'm maybe too pessimistic, but I just don't think that's going to happen. And so I don't want to say I can't do anything until they figure it out.
Thank you. I have a question from online. So this is from Christian Alanis. He said, as a result of AI disruption, do you think that many stable or big companies are facing trying times now because they lack the ability to see the value of offering a more localized form of service or tailoring to microeconomies?
I mean, this is one of the types of questions that we get about AI all the time. We don't really know what AI means for us. We're still exploring that, and I think we're in the early days of exploring it. So is AI going to cause companies to ignore local needs? Or is AI going to make it easier and less expensive to meet those needs in a really efficient way? I don't know the answer to that, because I don't know where it's going exactly. And it's going to take time. You know, these big new technologies, they don't reveal themselves immediately in terms of their effects. It takes them a long time. There's a famous quote from Robert Solow, who was an American economist that won the Nobel Prize in 1987 for work he did in the 1960s. Robert Solow said around 1990, he said, he's the father of modern economic growth theory, just so you know his field. He says, computers are everywhere except in the statistics, right? It just takes a while for us to figure out how to use it. And we have to change our processes. We have to rethink how we do things. And there will be products that we can't even imagine right now, or services we can't imagine right now, that will come if AI is as big as people say it could be, right? We can't imagine. How many jobs are there today that people in the 1980s or the 1970s had no idea that that would be a job, you know? So we don't know where this is going to go. And I think it's up to us to try to define it, you know? I think this is why this is why I'm glad you're all in school and, you know, getting skills and training and whatnot.
Good evening, great presentation. Regarding the services and the opportunity to capitalize on services when you're looking at manufacturing and the alternative, I was interested that in your list, government or the binational ecosystem was not listed.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why that was so?
Yeah, you know, because I'm dancing around this issue of state relations to business. And I don't want to, I mean, probably, I don't know if you can guess what my politics are or not, but I don't, you know, I don't want to get into a political debate about government, but clearly, government services are extremely important. Yeah, I don't know, you know, if we think about AI, what does AI mean for government services? I don't know. You know?
Yeah, but certainly
Yeah.
government, not only industry, but certainly skills that can support, including AI.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I'm thinking, you know.
No,
I'm
I totally agree with you. And I think it's, thank you for pointing that out. It wasn't up there. I think it should be.
yeah.
And next time I present this, if I do again, I will be there.
And I also wanted to commend you on addressing industry and skills that support education, such as culinary, and how if you're innovative, not only on one side of
Yeah.
the government, but certainly on the other,
Yeah.
you could emulate that
Yeah, yeah.
on both sides of,
Yeah,
you know, all border cities. So
yeah.
congratulations, and
Yeah,
thank you for pointing
thank
it
you.
out.
That's very kind. The culinary art school is really something. If you get a chance to visit it, I highly encourage you. It's not huge, but it's really dynamic. These students, over the course of a 3-year program, spend 3 internships in high-end restaurants, 2 of which are outside of Mexico. So they're going all over the world. These guys get placed into really high-end restaurants as skilled chefs. And, you know, that's, I don't know, I just think it's wonderful to see.
Are there any more questions from the audience?
Thank you, Dr. Gerber. My question has like 2 parts. The first part is that you said that the manufacturing, we are seeing a decline, but the value is still being added. And you said that services are growing. Do you think that border economies are like hotspots for services, in the sense that small business kind of services, because you said that scaling up services is very difficult, which is number 1. Because when we think of small businesses, people don't think of conventional entrepreneurship. They think of it as doing always something innovative, but this is conventional entrepreneurship where you see a growth opportunity, you just go in and open something. My second question is that I believe, I might be wrong, please correct me. You can scale up services in a more urban zone using platforms. So is that the niche for border economies, that you can disrupt what is conventionally believed in organization theory, that you can have a liminality between 2 countries, because you cannot organize between 2 countries. There's different rules, institutions. So is this like a hotspot for small business, or is this like an El Dorado for small businesses?
Really excellent question. I think it is a hotspot, and I think you understand it. I mean, you put your finger on it. That software, for example, is something that it's really difficult to stop it with tariffs, you know, and you can deliver it online so that it's not dependent upon the physical characteristics of your location, and you can scale it. I mean, there are. I don't mean to imply no services are ever scalable, because there are. I know in Mexico there are software shops that are being set up that are getting larger and larger, and they're providing services all over the world to places. So it is I think, you know, in your question is embedded this idea, which I totally agree with, that what we should be thinking about are what are the services that are going to generate high value added. You know, where can we earn a really good living?
Because the investment is basically very minimal.
Yeah,
compared to the fixed cost.
yeah, so low barriers to entry, yeah. I mean, some services, that's not true, right? I mean, if you're gonna make movies, I think that's gonna take some capital, but, yeah.
Excellent. We have another question over here. Are there any other questions from the audience that I need to?
Well, first of all, thank you for your presentation, and I want to remind the students here, those of you that are from here, from the border, consider yourself blessed and lucky that you were born or raised here in the border, because you bring an asset that many that have tried to get here as soon as they can and learn what it is that makes us special. I tell everyone that I thank God I live in Texas, and I thank God that I live and work in Laredo, Texas, because the small businesses is what drives the border communities as well. And the services side is, I'm a financial services company. You need to add that to your list, by the way. Financial services.
Yeah.
You know.
Oops.
But one of the things that's happening on border communities because of the success of manufacturing in Mexico, and Mexico becoming such a, especially auto manufacturing platform. Border communities, I hear much of this in economic development corporations, the U.S. side. We want to get into manufacturing. Following your trend in manufacturing is on a downward track. Question to those of us that have been following this stuff for many, many years. We could never get manufacturing on the U.S. side, even though manufacturing was growing on the Mexican side, Nuevo Laredo or Reynosa or Tijuana, you know, as well. And what do you attribute that manufacturing never kicked off on the U.S. side? And it kicked off so well as a result of, you know, the Maquiladora regime, or now EMEX, but it could never filter into manufacturing on the U.S. side. What do you think was lacking? That's one question. The other question is, what is your view in regards of what the perception and the media, social or mainstream, projects of the image of the border versus the successes of the border? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll start with the second question first, because I have a story. When Joan Anderson and I wrote our book, 50 Years of Change on the U.S.-Mexico border, and we were shopping it around to different publishers. And so, you know, we're in California and went to talk to the University of California Press about it. They liked it. They felt it was a little too optimistic, right? It wasn't dark enough. You know, they wanted a darker scenario. And we were saying, well, no, but there are a lot of problems on the border. We get that, but a lot of them are problems of success, right? We've grown too fast. We haven't been able to build out our infrastructure in a way that keeps up with the population growth, right? And this has generated problems, right? Clearly, the difference between what the media says and what it thinks it knows, media at all levels, from popular media to academic media, and the reality, there's an enormous gulf. And that's why I began with that first slide of all the you know, the things that people say and think about the border, you know. And if you travel around the U.S. and you run into people and they find out you live on the border, you probably have heard them say things about the border where you just have to kind of shake your head and, you know, where do I start to disentangle their thinking? You know, I don't know if that answers the second question you asked. The first question about why didn't investment come down? You know, that's a really tough question, but, you know, here's one thought that I have about that is, okay, I want to open up a manufacturing plant, and I want, and I'm going to do it, you know, I'm flexible where I do it, okay? But I recognize if I go across the border in Mexico, wages are a fraction of what they are on the Texas or Arizona or California side. So I still have the proximity to the infrastructure of the US, right? I'm close to the border, so I'm close to US highways and all of that other infrastructure. So it's worth it for me to think, do I want to be in Laredo or do I want to be in Nuevo Laredo? Do I want to be in McAllen or do I want to be in Reynosa? I think that's a factor, but this is a complex question. The answer has to have many parts. It has to have many parts. I think there's kind of a systematic exclusion of Latino populations from consideration, either intentionally or unintentionally. That businesses don't see, or they just don't think about it as an opportunity. I may be mistaken about that. I don't know. But
But the manufacturing
yeah,
needed the servicing side.
yeah,
That's why the US side became the servicing side that allowed not just the logistics,
Yeah.
but the retail, the quality of life
Yeah.
services that come with that.
Well, but the logistics is, the logistics is really interesting because, this is a relatively high-skilled service. Some of it's very high-skilled service sector, and it's dealing with the sort of the movement of goods, most of which are probably going to end up in the U.S. So you locate your company on this side. I think from a location decision standpoint, that may be, may make sense. That if the goods are going to come this way, I want to control all the pieces from this side, right? And because the services that have taken off, retail took off just because of Mexican policy. That's a low skill, for the most part. Services. If you look at what retail workers make, it's below average wages. These are not well paid. So services on this side took off, but it was transportation, logistics, and those other, information processing to some extent that serve that trade community, and the manufacturers on the other side, which may have an office on this side. As the gentleman in the back pointed out, a lot of them are U.S.-owned firms or corporate offices are in the U.S.
Can you elaborate, though, on your comment about the intention or unintentional decision?
Yeah. So I'm not a sociologist, and when this guy I quoted earlier, Robert Solow, about computers, he also has another famous quip: is when economists try to compare differences in growth rates between countries, they usually go out in a blaze of amateur sociology, right? But issues of racism, I think, are not absent. How do they play out? I don't know. But if I'm looking at a predominantly Latino community, which is low income, on the U.S. side of the U.S.-Mexican border, and I know nothing about the border, I know nothing about Latino communities, do I think of this as a place that I want to invest? Now, obviously, in most cases, it's not going to be one person necessarily making that decision. There's a whole bunch of other things. It's more complex than I understand. But we know that there has been systematic exclusion of people from opportunity, and I just think that's just the reality, And what are the consequences of that? Well, that's one reason maybe border communities are poor. When you look at this, this goes back to your question about why didn't manufacturing come here. When we look at metropolitan areas on the U.S. side of the border, right, outside of San Diego, which is an outlier because it's also on the Pacific Basin and has a much more diverse population, right? Outside of San Diego, these are some of the poorest communities in the U.S. Why is that? Why? That's something I've been thinking about for a long time. I don't really have a good answer for why that is. I'm sorry? A lot of people come in, but I don't know if that works well because a lot of people don't stay in the border community, right? They move into the interior where there are more jobs. I don't know what the percentage is that stays. I'm not sure. But I know in some border communities, it's just a pass-through. Yeah.
I'd like to remind people to put your hand up and get the microphone because we have an online audience about as big as the audience here, and they can't hear you if you talk without a microphone. So if you have a comment, please raise your hand, and we'll bring a microphone to you immediately.
Oh, so I guess it's my turn. Thank you. Great presentation, very interesting. James, can you elaborate on services as far as the part that is experience? It seems that this generation now, what is it, Z? Are we on the Z generation or something like that? Or it is about experiencing something, right? And so it is service. When you were talking about the culinary school, I do not know. I really like watching Robert Grill. It's one guy that gives recipes about carne asada and whatnot. And so, but even though I don't cook, but I do enjoy watching those videos. And I wonder if there is a part of the economy that can capture that value add based upon the experience, even if it is just in your mind. Thank you.
Yeah. Boy, that's a tough question. I don't know, I'm not quite sure what the question is, actually. The
value of experience.
I don't know how to answer that. Yeah.
So there is a difference between the service that you provide a service, so not because he's here, but representing IBC, but they pride themselves on great service. And so that's why they have a lot of clients, and one of the best. Yes, IBC does more, and great accounting and all cleanest, balance sheet and all this good stuff. And so because of that, how is that when you invest in giving your client a great experience through service?
Yeah.
Because that was your question about how is that whether service can increase the value of a community.
Yeah. Well, I think you answered the question yourself, right? I mean, if you provide, great service, it creates better value and you have more customers, right? And you can expand more easily.
We have another question over here.
I mean, I think it's really important what you're putting your finger on, the importance of providing good quality service. So, just one last thought on that is that if you compare, doctor's office visits in Tijuana with San Diego or Mexico with the US, you get better service in Mexico, right? Because you can talk to the doctor for a longer period of time and you get that sense that you are a person that matters, not just one of, a bunch of people that are just passing through the office on a conveyor belt. Yeah.
Good evening. Mine's a two-part question. The first one being, as employers, many times in an interview process, one of the questions asked is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see the border in 5 years? And second, as Laredo a competitor, what do you think are the strongest border communities throughout the whole United States?
Well, that's a trick question. Well, Laredo, just to answer that second one first. No, okay, so I think, what to answer both your questions, what we need to, I think, as people that live in the border, we need to envision now the border we want in the future. And we need to work for that now. We need to think about what, not what doesn't work, but what do we want to see? What are the things that we want to see? I'll give you a good example, Laredo-based. international park on the river, right? 5 years, that'd be great if that existed, right? A park where you can enter from the Mexican side, you can enter from the US side. There's a little bridge that goes out to a platform which is in the middle of the river. People can mingle there or go across to the other side if they want. You can have concerts with bands playing from that platform, right? The Border Patrol knows how to manage this because they already do on the US-Canadian border. There are parks like this on the US-Canadian border, right? Why don't we have any on the US-Mexican border? These are the things we need to envision. We need to think about, okay, who do we talk to? Where do we get the money? A lot of these things, you know, I say continually, you know, if there's money involved, it'll be a lot easier to do it. If there's no money involved, it's kind of hard to get it done. Getting a park done, there's really not a lot of money. That's harder. Getting CBX, do you guys know CBX in San Diego? This is one of the greatest things on the border. It's one of the biggest successes. So you park on the US side, you pay, the price has gone up and up and up. I think it's $30 now. And you walk about 2 blocks through a covered passageway, over the border, down a flight of stairs, and you're in the middle of the Tijuana airport. And you can repeat that on the way back. And there's no wait time, right? It's financed by your fee, right? And in return, the company that manages it guarantees that there will never be more than 15 minutes wait time. I think they've pretty much met that goal. Right? It's fabulous. It's fabulous. We need a bunch of those. You know, I mean, in Tijuana, the airport's right on the border. I mean, you can stand in the terminal and throw a rock and hit the border wall. You know, it's that close. And not all airports are like that on the border, but you know, there are other ways to manage that. You know, those are the kinds of things that I think we need to think about. How do we speed up the flow of people across the border? You know, how do we speed up commerce? Commerce is easier because there's money involved. But how do we speed up the flow of students crossing the border to go to school? We have a new experiment that the CBP is trying in San Diego where there's an expedited student lane. So this is like the Sentry lane, but it's for students. Right? We need those at every pair of Twin Cities where there are people crossing the border to go to school. We need to be envisioning this stuff, you know. And in 5 years, I'll still be, you know, writing about this, hopefully.
Thank you very much. I see that we've gone over our time, and I know some of our students have classes they need to get to. So I think we'll call it an end at this point. So thank you, Dr. Gerber, for an excellent talk. Before everyone leaves, I'd like to thank everyone who's made this event possible. I'd like to thank IBC and Commerce Bank for their generous support of the lecture series. I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank all the people who've worked behind the scenes for this. I particularly want to thank Amy Palacios, who's the Associate Director for the Center for the Study of Western Hemispheric Trade, who manages this event. And I'd like to thank the staff in the center and the School of Business. I'd like to thank OIT and e-learning for their generous support and event services, and also the students from the Dean's Student Advisory Council, who always help us with managing the microphones and entrances to this event. So thank you finally to everyone for coming, and thank you for staying here, even though we went 5 minutes over. And we have one gift to give Dr. Gerber. We are going to give him the globe.
Awesome.